of course, I did do an essay collection. That was my last book in 2020. But I just felt like, no, this is The Last Illusion, this sort of fabulous thriller that had to do with 9/11 and the Persian Book of Kings, a very weird book. That was my love. And so to deal with this era of rejection, which was brutal for me. I mean, 2.5 years. My first book just took a few months to sell. I decided to at least amuse myself and start making a file that was kind of like a parody of their requests. And I just thought, oh, they want women characters. What if I wrote a book of all women characters? What if I, just wrote a book that was all Iranian women and all of our chaos? And, I just started doing what people often say to do to survive that rejection era, just keep writing, But I already felt I had my second novel. I wasn't ready to really write a third novel. So I started this kind of fun thing for myself to just amuse myself, amuse some of my friends who I could send snippets to, stuff like that. I wasn't taking it seriously. And then something shifted. Eventually, The Last Illusion got published in 2014. It got sold in 2013 and it got published. But maybe just before then, and then after, obviously, I got very, very interested in this project and sort of ideas started coming to me. And I started to think, what can I do with this? I mean, there was a point at which I was really haunted by creating a Valley Girl stream of consciousness that was like the Molly Bloom chapter in Joyce's Ulysses. I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I just kept drafting it over and over. And then at another point, I really solidified these 4 daughters, which most of them, Roxana had come to me, several of them had come to me, not all of them, but I started getting more and more into the characters and their dilemmas. And so on and off, my third book was my memoir, Sick, then my essay collection, on and off all these years, 13 years, I worked on this book. That's a long way to answer your question, but it took a while for me to get really, really interested in it and to take it really seriously. But it was actually the early pandemic era where this book is set. It's a period piece. That was when I was like, oh, okay, I have the setting. I know exactly what this book is about now. And that brought everything to life and kind of created for me an interesting challenge for the book. So yeah, that's a long way of answering your great question.
Well, but I think it's important. I mean, that's the foundational story of this novel. And you were just sort of waiting for a global pandemic in order to crystallize your vision, right? And I think you said somewhere that you revised this novel so much. Like you say, I'm not a big rewriter, but I've rewritten TEHRANGELES many times and it made me nervous. Why did it make you nervous? Just because you don't usually do it that way?
Well, I've always been a really good problem solver. It's not that I don't revise, but I've always been really interested in fixing things instead of just throwing out pages. I know a lot of writers pride themselves on like, I cut 1,000 pages or, I always used to tell my students this too, like before you fully cut and move on, see if there's something you can do to actually save it, because there must have been something in your original instinct that made it suitable. So try to explore that before you really dump it. Obviously I've thrown away pages, but I always really prided myself for being good at that problem solving and trying to make things work. I mean, this is also a personality issue of mine, being afraid of confrontation and wanting to problem solve things and just trying to make everything work. So this book, I just had to just keep rewriting. I mean, I had the daughters, I had some things really fit the parents, I had certain things that were really fixed, this snack food, pizza bomb, I had certain things that were there, but I was so worried about getting their voices right, getting the time right, the era right. And obviously 2011 till now, those are actually several micro eras. Time, goes by so differently at this age we're in. So even just a few years feels like, a whole other lifetime. So I really, I wanted to like with this book, we had to make sure a lot of the slang was exactly what people were saying in 2020, not what they were saying in 2021 or 2022. Was this emoji even around then? Stuff like that. So it was actually quite a pain, because period pieces can be easy to write if they're way in the past and you can just settle into some nice research. But this was a really strange research that was like in real time with some delays and then going back. And then, you know, the pandemic for me was horrific because at one point I was living in the epicenter of the pandemic in Queens in New York. And all around me, it was just 24/7, you know, ambulances. And we were in a lot of crisis. I was in a building complex with 3,000 people. And in the end, I lost 7 friends, you know, to COVID and COVID related illnesses, you know, including depression. So, you know, and I had just gotten over years of being very chronically ill and disabled. I was in a sort of remission period just before of COVID hit. So I was personally, like so many people, utterly devastated by the pandemic. So I found nothing funny about the pandemic. I mean, to write a satire about the pandemic sounds pretty unacceptable on many levels. I understand that. But to write a satire about the mishaps around the pandemic really interested me, because our government was dropping the ball in all sorts of ways. I mean, the Trump circus was so horrific. You know, the stuff people were saying, the conspiracy theorists, the super spreader parties, the rise of influencers in that era. It was a total circus. So I tried to focus on everything there, not just in the book, but also for me as a human to survive. Because every day, you know, I was sitting there in Queens, barely recovered from very severe illness, thinking, what's my
What
day
is that? This was Lyme. Was this Lyme disease?
Yeah, Lyme and a whole trajectory of illnesses related. Because in 2017, 2018, in my old apartment in Harlem, they did a bunch of pretty illegal renovations and demolition. And eventually the roof came down on that apartment of mine. And so for months I was getting sick and sicker. And there was, you know, this was an old pre-war landmark building that had never been gutted. And so I was reacting to all sorts of things, probably asbestos and lead, but also mold and all sorts of stuff. And living at random people's houses, trying to save myself as we discovered more things about that apartment. So all sorts of things can trigger Lyme relapses. Mold is a big one, but so are other things with toxins and all that. So I was very sick and didn't even have a stable place to live for years. And then we discovered more things, like I had Ehlers-Danlos. I had, you know, my POTS was a definite, and it was pretty severe. POTS, or dysautonomia as they call it. I had pretty bad fibromyalgia. I discovered I had, you know, so many other illnesses came out of this period, because I was also crowdfunding and going to proper doctors. So it was a really destabilizing time. And I was just going day by day thinking how to survive. And, you know, I finally had a stable, nice apartment that felt healthy enough. And then, you know, I wasn't working full time. I used to work 10 million jobs frantically to pay my rent. During the pandemic, I was trying to see if I could stretch some of that crowdfund money and just do a little bit of work here and there so I could work on my health. So it was a lot of alone time at home, trying to think, how do I structure my day? I did become one of those bakers. You know, there's people who did sourdough. There's people who baked cakes. That was me. There's people who shaved their head. You know, you did all sorts of things to cope with that. But one of the things that I also did was I spent a lot of time on TikTok. I spent a lot of time researching young people of that era for this book, but also, you know, ended up kind of like helping me too, you know, brought something lighthearted and interesting to my day. There was a lot I didn't understand. And, you know, also I would contact some young people I knew and ask them questions. And I was in a period where we were all over the world. We were sending each other voice memos and just trying to, you know, survive the day. We're still in the pandemic. I always remind people, but that early pandemic period, you know, that first year, that was something else. So, yeah.
Well, and I was going to say the fact that what has been born of that dark experience, or that set of dark experiences, is a book as sort of fun and funny. It's not without its darkness, but this is what I would call like a pop satire. Yes. Like, I don't know if that's how you would categorize it, but
absolutely.
The cover, which I quite love, is this burst of color. Yeah. And this is a book that sort of screams fun from the cover. It's fun to read this book.
Oh,
it wasn't fun. Yeah, it wasn't fun, as you said, to be a chronically ill person living in Queens in 2020. Oh, no. That makes a certain psychological sense to me, that you would channel your anxiety and ennui and difficult emotional stuff into a work like this? Like, this
Oh,
is the reaction.
definitely.
And
It was, yeah.
well,
I mean, I
I
was
want
devastated in that era, and I still, I found some tweets of that era where I was saying things like, I think the whole country is just going to let us die. And I was going back to that like 9/11 era where we felt like, okay, the country cared about us on paper, but they didn't really care. I had friends from LA sending me like boxes with toilet paper and grains and things like that. But I was like, is this how my story ends? Like, they're just gonna do nothing, and we're all. So I went from a lot of panic to just this sort of really weird, numb depression. And then when my friends started dying, I mean, it was in a really bad state. I would spend hours and hours on Twitter. Sometimes just arguing with people, I was, there's parts where I talk about one of the characters, Roxana, like killing days on Twitter, just being annoying. And there were moments where I was like, oh, this is me right now. So I'm just,
hey, who among us has not killed a day being annoying on Twitter?
right. But it was such a terrible, dark time. And I was so alone, and I was, too scared to spend my money that I was using on my health on therapy. And I would go to some therapy and I'd panic about losing money. And, it was such a depressing time. And so this book was the one thing that I could work on that gave me some sort of purpose. And I got more and more interested in it. But it was really challenging. I mean, at one point I made kind of like a Tehrangeles altar by my desk with all this like mood board stuff, and I would get very superstitious working on it. I started to really think of these characters as very real, and then the panic set in that I don't want to just write this flat, easy, just pure satire. I don't know if there is a pure 100% satire that exists, because I don't think that would ever really interest people as much as they think, So I had to ground the satire in a little bit of heart and have it have something like empathy, certainly empathy, but something else that I don't have a word for, really. So I really did not just want to write like I didn't want to just make fun of things. I don't find that to be very interesting. So I during that period, as I was in this really pretty severe depression and trying to get into the footing of this book, the part that took me the longest was trying to make sure that I could find a way of understanding these characters so I could care for them. And so their trajectories could not just connect with readers, but could really connect truly with me. And that was hard because, yeah, these are pretty messy people, as we all are, obviously, but they were messy in a way that I didn't relate to because I didn't have personal experience. There's no character in this book that shares an age with me for that. And then class, certainly.
So, okay, let's give listeners who have not read the book yet, like kind of an overview of the plot. You basically are telling a family story about a family called the Milanis. And you have Al and Homa, who are the parents, and then their 4 daughters, Roxana, Vanna, Violet, Haley, and Mina. Is that right?
Yep.
And right. They are living in Los Angeles in what is known as TEHRANGELES. And I should say it's known as TEHRANGELES to people in the Iranian diaspora and to people who might live here in Los Angeles or people who have, I don't know, maybe some knowledge of Los Angeles. But I think there are maybe a lot of people out there who don't even know what TEHRANGELES is. So maybe we should explain that to people because it's the title of the book.
It's actually so funny. Some people that don't know, I've heard people call it TEHRANGELES, like Tehran and angels. And I thought, that's kind of beautiful, actually. I don't mind that pronunciation. And then some people thought I invented this term, which I was like, no. It's a very well-known portmanteau, at least for us. So some people call it Little Persia, but it's a neighborhood in LA. It's a very wealthy enclave here, mostly wealthy, of Iranian Americans. So you've got Westwood, Bel Air, Brentwood, Beverly Hills, some of Santa Monica, I think counts. It's this West Side affluent Iranian enclave. And it's, when you go into that area, there's signs in Persian, and you hear everybody speaking Persian. We say, of course, in our language, Farsi everywhere. So it's been like this for decades. This is where a lot of Iranians came right after the revolution and after the Iran-Iraq War. So when we came to the U.S. in the early 80s, we didn't live anywhere close to there because we didn't have that kind of money. We lived in the San Gabriel Valley, but we would always go, like, sometimes even once a week. We would go to the little markets or to get some cholo kebab, what we call our kebab dishes, or bastani, which is like Persian ice cream. And we would always drive out there. And most Iranians who live in Southern California always go over there for something or another. So it's dear to us. And then later I was like a shop girl in Beverly Hills on Rodeo Drive, which Rodeo Drive for a lot of Iranians feels like, a very Tehrangeles street. You see quite a lot of us. So yeah, it's that neighborhood. And I think I was a little nervous giving it that title, even though I think it's the right title. But for me personally, like, if I could have put an aside in there, I grew up in the San Gabriel Valley. First we were in Alhambra, Monterey Park, and then we were in Pasadena, and then South Pasadena, right on the border of Pasadena, a little apartment district called Raymond Hill. So that, I still think, like, I should count as a Tehrangelino. That should still count. But that's a footnote, because the highly visible Iranians, in this state, are really the 1%, and they've dominated a lot of the discourse, even though most of us do not fit in that category at all.
Well, my old landlord, Reza, was Iranian. Kind of, I really liked him, but he had like this kind of gruff, like kind of, but underneath, like, very nice, and I got along with him, and I was just like talking to him, and the house that I lived in, it was nice, but it was old, and I don't know, it needed work, basically. Incidentally, he later ended up razing it to the ground and building like some mansion on the property or whatever. But
probably a McMansion, right? Like one of those.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the way of LA. But I remember talking to him and just being like, so, like, you're in the real estate game? He's like, yes. And I was like, oh, so you just do this? You own homes and rent them out? He's like, he said something like, I own 175 properties in Los Angeles. I was just like, holy shit. And I was like, you must be doing well. He's like, my daughters will have everything. Like, he's like still paying off the mortgages, but they're going to inherit like this empire of like rental properties that just is going to be generating a monthly check of like, whatever, $700,000.
That's a very savvy Tehrangeles energy. Yep. There were a lot of Iranians who were very good at coming here and figuring out how to make a lot of money, which was why, my brother and I were like, wow, why aren't my parents?
Why didn't I get that? Yeah. Why didn't I get that gene? Like, just understanding how to work the system.
Amazing. My people know how to hustle, for sure.
Yeah.
They can survive anything.
So Tehrangeles is kind of this broad West Side network of communities. There's home to a lot of members of the Iranian diaspora. And this is very much a novel about place and identity. And part of the fun of the kind of satirical aspects of the novel, it's like funny and heartbreaking at the same time, is that you have this family, Al and Homa and their 4 daughters. They're very wealthy, and they're very wealthy because Al has invented something called, which I think you said earlier, pizza bomb, if I'm pronouncing that properly.
That's perfect. Yes.
It's like pizza with BOMME at the end. It's got this kind of like French flair, and yet it also has some sort of like military industrial complex vibe happening.
Yes.
But it's almost like quintessentially American. It's like, oh, that could maybe work. But in this novel, Al has made a fortune selling what is, in essence, the competitor to Hot Pockets. It's like a doughy ball filled with like melted cheese,
yes.
Which sounds delicious. And they are living like very well in what, Beverly Hills, I guess, is that where they're living? I'm trying to.
Yeah, it's a little. I tried to create like a little bit of an imaginary neighborhood. It is basically Beverly Hills and Bel Air in my mind, with a little bit of Hollywood Hills, but it's essentially that. Yes.
Okay, and the daughters who are distinct, you've kind of created four distinct personalities and sets of interests, and in them, I guess, as people are, everyone's different, and they are primed to have their own reality show. There's a production company that is interested in them. These daughters are all gorgeous, to greater and lesser extents, but this is a genetically blessed family, and these daughters are stunning,
Yes.
and they're super rich. Like, money is no object for these people.
No.
And you have Roxana, who is the second oldest, who is like her father's daughter. Definitely. She's the Spitfire. She's a little unhinged, but she's bright and she's shrewd. And she's this person who knows how to work the system, yes. Right? Like, this is a person who is going to thrive in late capitalism. Like,
oh, yes.
She's got it. Yeah. Like, she's shameless. You know what I'm saying? Like, mostly yes. Shameless. Definitely. And they are going to go for this reality series. She's kind of the star of the show. She's the Kim Kardashian of the yes. family, in essence. Definitely. And she has, but to kind of go back to what I was saying about the satire and the theme of identity in this book, she has been telling her schoolmates that she is Italian. This is something that's been a running, like a recurring thing in her life, to just claim Italian identity based on her personal appearance. She she could pass for Italian with dark hair, dark eyes, whatever. And then she's also changing her zodiac sign, which is hilarious, but like literally having like a transplant. She wants to be, I believe, a Scorpio instead of a yes. Gemini.
Right.
So identity is at the core of this thing. And it's very funny, but as the book progressed for me, it became like deeper. It becomes deeper. It's a deeper concern that is sort of undergirding the poppier aspects of the novel, right? And I'm just curious, like, is Iranians claiming to be Italian a thing?
Yeah, it's very funny. It is kind of a thing. It's a thing in a little bit of a different way. I mean, I think about like the 9/11 era, right? Or even earlier, the years after the hostage crisis that I remember very vividly, even though I was a small child. Iranians really wanted to hide. I mean, that's when you heard a lot of Iranians first get very adamant about using the word Persian. I mean, now there's different reasons why Iranians say Persian, but a lot of Iranians thought, okay, that's a good way to like make it look warm and fuzzier. But then there was also this panic to just, if you were faced with someone who is xenophobic, Islamophobic, or just plain racist, or all the different layers of bigotry you can find when people hate Iranians, then there was this great temptation. I still remember a woman saying to me, an Iranian woman saying, well, we're Eurasian. And I'm like, Eurasian? What's Eurasian? She's like, it's fine. Just say that. They'll get it, And I do remember a cab ride I had after 9/11 in New York. And the driver was Italian. And he made an offhand remark about us being Sicilian. And I was like, okay,
I'm Sicilian. I'm Sicilian.
Yeah, so I was complimented, that's kind of great. And I think Sicilians do have some Arab blood that we probably share, sure, why not? But I thought, oh, that could be safe, right? I'm not gonna correct this man because he was going on a really wild rant about Muslims and just Middle Easterners in general. And at that point, even though, Iranians were not the hijackers, we were not, people were just like, these people in this region, they're all the same. The Islamic Republic funds everything. It's all the same. They're bad. This is a problem region. I just saw an influencer the other day say, the Middle East is an armpit of a region. We just don't need it. We just need to not think about it, And it's like that attitude. She probably thought she was doing something saying that, like it was something novel, but horrible, bigots have been saying that forever. So, while I've never said like I'm Italian, I personally have had that temptation. I know a lot of Iranians who have, who've been seen as Greek or Italian, who've had the privilege of passing, being like me, like pale olive, lighter skinned. I mean, my father is much darker skinned. I have members of my family the skin tone spectrum with Iranians is huge. You could be very pale to very dark. So it sort of depends on how you're perceived. And when we say privilege of passing, it's obviously a very double-edged privilege, because it's also a mess in your head, and weird things happen, and it's very complicated. So it is a bit of a thing, but the way Roxana handles things, and I think this is Roxana in general, she takes everything to its extreme. So she runs with it. I mean, she has a boyfriend who's Italian American, and so she realizes the last name Milani, like Milan. She's very obsessed with fashion, so she knows Milan. And so she realizes she could be very easily interpreted as Italian, especially since, pizza bomb could, it's pizza, Italian. This is, Italian American. Why not? And she knows her dad is going to kind of back this up in a way, because Al doesn't really want to be seen as anything but American anyways. So she kind of gets away with it, in the way that younger people don't really explain too much about themselves when they're in school, especially if they're surrounded by other affluent people, like the way Roxana was. And she's a content creator. She's a very successful influencer. So she's able to control her own narratives always. So she's used to that. She's been making her own money for years, even though she has daddy's money. So she feels very confident doing this, except when the pandemic hits, these sisters were all kind of siloed, who had their own life. I mean, they're all kind of influencers and content creators to some degree, but they're now stuck together. And she realizes, oh my God, there's people in my own family who don't realize I've done this. And she hasn't thought it through. Like, they'll be in high school with me, and now what am I going to do? And so this is a secret she shares with one of the sisters that she was in high school with. And that sister happens to be Mina Milani, who's the character I feel closest to and I really adore. And she's like, I am not okay with this. And what are you going to do with this show where we have to talk about this? And they end up being adversaries for a period. And then Mina does some stuff that's not great. But it's so identity. I've always been interested in identity. Everything I've written involves identity. I'm fascinated by Iranian and American identity, and then the combination and how they play together, how those planes intersect in kind of disturbing ways often. So for me, trying to imagine Gen Z grappling with that, and in this era, it was pretty interesting.
So, well, yeah. There's like a melange of influences that I could feel. I was actually gratified in doing prep for this interview to learn that some of my instincts, like it confirmed some of my instincts about the book. Like I kind of detect the book's DNA, at least in part. Good. And I want to talk about it because, as I was saying earlier, pop satire, but with like darker undercurrents and deeper concerns around like things like identity. And just to kind of give at least a partial list of influences on this novel, Little Women,
definitely,
Louisa May Alcott, The Kardashians, Bret Easton Ellis, and in particular, maybe Less Than Zero, which is a book about young people in LA.
Yes. I mean, Glamorama, American Psycho, and Less Than Zero, I would say, are three books that he's written that really stayed with me when I was writing this. I even reread Glamorama and parts of American Psycho. And then Less Than Zero, I've always loved. I have it memorized practically. So, yeah.
And then Crazy Rich Asians, the Kevin Kwan novel.
Yes, definitely.
So am I missing anything? Is that it, or is that?
There's a little bit of that Molly Bloom Joyce thing, but it's a sort of its own thing in a way. But yeah, those are the main ones for sure. I mean, when Kevin Kwan's Crazy Rich Asians came out after I had already thought of this book, but when I read the Crazy Rich Asians series, again, it was in the early pandemic. I just got obsessed with that trilogy, and I just started reading everything Kevin had written. My publicist at Knopf Doubleday was sending me some of his books because we're in the same umbrella publisher, right? So was obsessed. And I thought, these books are so good. He's so excellent at this kind of satire. And it gave me courage to write like a Crazy Rich West Asians, which I told him, we've now messaged quite a bit. He blurbed this book and he was so lovely about it. He told me he'd been to like an amazing Persian wedding. He gets it. He knows his community very well. And so he was really gracious. And I was so honored because Kevin for me is an absolute master and just one of the greatest writers living today, I think. So he was, when I read his work, it gave me a lot of courage in this redrafts I was doing to just go there all the way. Don't be apologetic. Don't be like trying to explain things too much or feeling self-conscious about the hyper capitalist, commerce obsession in this book. Like, you have to do that to make the book real, and hopefully people will understand that that's not my heart. That's not it, that this is satire. And so, I'm not like, yay, capitalism in 2024, but yeah, he was huge for that. And I know Brad Easton Ellis is divisive for a lot of stuff that he said over the years. I mean, I don't keep up with a lot of that stuff anymore. I know I don't know. He was someone, when I read American Psycho ages ago, which was like, a capitalist horror story, it was really profound for me. I mean, especially the scary stuff, of course, is something, right? But the other stuff, the sort of digressions, if we could call it like a Moby Dick, the digressions for me in that book are the music reviews, those little interludes that he has. I absolutely loved it. And so in this book, you have these young women doing, and the mother doing these little essay sections, which are like little reviews, but they're also like confessionals that the producers want them to do so they could have another dimension to this show, because they're not getting what they want from these girls when they're sending them like video diaries, So yeah, Brett's work was really profound for me. I really think, and then the Glamorama, how like every sentence mentions a brand name. It's just relentless, I had to research brand names so much. I said in an interview, like, I wasn't really even sure what Fendi home line or the Bentley home line was like, but
right.
I was like, okay.
Listen, I was reading this being like, God, how does she know all this stuff? Like, I felt like I got anxious. It makes me anxious to read like brands and like people talking about their Versace this and their pumps from, I'm just like, okay, like, I can't even believe this is real.
No,
and yet
all of it's real. I had to go back and make sure all of it was real. And I just like, there's a mother has like a signature fragrance in one room or something. I had to research that. These are things I know nothing about, but I had to, go there. It makes me anxious too. Like, I was just like, eek,
But here's the thing, is that this book, like, there's a silliness to it almost, where you're like, oh my God, these people are unserious, right? Like, it has the sort of effect of reality TV.
Yes.
Right? They're making a reality show, but
absolutely.
You're reading them on the page and their concerns and their daily activities and their worldviews and the things that they're hung up on. And with the exception of Mina, who is the sort of bookish, queer younger sister, who I think you said is your favorite character, the character you probably could relate to the most, most easily.
Absolutely.
But
I love her so much.
What I kept noting to myself was, like, yeah, this seems like a wild satire, but it's actually really not that far from a certain reality that we often see portrayed on television, on our computer screens.
Right.
And it's like representative of a value system that I got to say I find pretty repellent, like this sort of like hyper-capitalist, like we just have endless money and we love to flaunt, like, all that kind of stuff. Or we're just like really interested in like who's got the most likes or who has the coolest handbag or whatever,
Right.
But you said in a previous interview, I want to quote it. You said, I think all my fiction has been darkly comic with elements of satire. That's where I am most comfortable always. It's what I like to read, and it's really sort of my worldview. I think it's very Iranian also, to laugh at tragedy. And it's that last line that I think strikes me the most, is that there is an element, for all the fun and for all of the money is no object sort of craziness of it all, there's something tragic inside of it, right? There's something tragic about this value system and this pursuit. And I think at the core of it, it is this family's relationship to its own identity, and specifically its relationship to its Iranian heritage. And it's in every single one of them. I think most specifically Roxana and Al and Homa. That's where I felt like it was most crystallized. Because no matter how far away they may be, and no matter how long they may have been in the United States, and no matter how much they are thriving, there is a part of their identity that will always be deeply and inextricably Iranian.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a central anxiety for all the characters you mentioned, and maybe all of them in a way, but most pronounced in them for sure. I mean, there's a point where Roxana panics about the concept of legacy. She's just really learned that, and she's thinking about that quite a lot. And she's like upset at her dad. And she's like, why don't you care more? This reality TV is an opportunity for us to cement our legacy. Like, we're just known as like snack food heiresses. Like, it can't just be about Pizza Bomb. It's got to be about something bigger, And she's like literally having a panic attack and melting down, and just is. And I thought that was kind of interesting. I mean, I don't, my personal views, I also find this stuff repellent. I'm more of a socialist than anything. I don't believe in billionaires. I don't believe in the 1%. I don't like, I remember I dated somebody once who was like inheriting multi-millions, and I went to his Hamptons mansion, his family's Hamptons mansion. It was just, I never felt more like lonely and cold and sad, and it was so hideous and horrible. And then like going to a Cinderella in the Hamptons, and these like perfect blonde housewives like just looking at me in my flip-flops and my ripped clothes. I look so shoddy. And I just thought, I would just, if I lived in this world, I would kill myself. Like, there's no way like I could survive. I'm not saying, yay, it's so great to be poor, because we, and growing up like lower middle class, low income, like that's not, I don't want to say that's, I'm so happy that was the case, but that I don't relate to this stuff, that wasn't my daily life. Like, I do also think that's a blessing, because I really felt bad for these characters. I felt like they were trapped. And that comes in a big way with the youngest daughter, Haley, like, who becomes like MAGA. She becomes like a MAGA conspiracy theorist at one point. And she's very young. So I could kind of say to myself, okay, she's trapped. She's going through a phase. She's read the stuff online. She doesn't know what she's doing. But it was really hard for me, because I could see how easy it is for the wealthy to go there. That's why I really treasure Mina, because she knows, even though they are 1%, that this isn't it. This isn't the reality. I mean, all the characters at one point or another say, oh, it's fine. Money solves everything. But of course, it's like, the irony is they're in the early pandemic era. Like, some of my friends who died were extremely wealthy and had great access to healthcare. Like, COVID does not discriminate, And so money doesn't obviously solve everything. It solves a lot. I wish I had more, but it doesn't solve everything. And so they're dealing with that. And it really was something, again, I had to research a lot and really think about and think, is there a world in which I can feel for the 1%? Like, is it possible? How could I understand this? And it was really just through their Iranianness and their marginalization that I could kind of get in there and really explore it. I mean, even the Iranian tendency to love campy things, like when we did the cover that you mentioned, I love the cover so much. We had this incredible, talented designer, a freelance designer that Pantheon got, Philip Suzo, I think is how you say his last name, really amazing guy. And his covers are amazing. And I remember saying to Knopf Doubleday, at first they had a woman's face, and I was like, no. Is there a way we can not just have a woman's face? And it was very tastefully done. And I said, what about a Persian cat? There's a Persian cat in this book. And for me, that Persian cat is almost like a deity in this book. why can't we have an opportunity to put the cat on the cover? And I thought they'd say, no, you're being silly. And then my editor was like, wait a sec, let's ask the designer, and he came back, and it was like a slightly more tasteful cat, and the flowers were slightly more tasteful. And I said, listen, you don't have to worry, you're not going to offend us. Like, the Persian aesthetic, we are a little bit like loud and flashy and campy. We love that stuff, like, doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, but that just tends to be our aesthetic. You can kind of go crazy here. so that was also like really fun, and to try to weave that into this book, and to try to sort of like explain it and understand it, and make sure like have like outsiders understand. I mean, I can see, I don't like to read tons of like Goodreads reviews or things like that, but I have taken a little bit of a peek, and I can see some people are not getting certain things, or they think like, oh, these people are horrible. Why would I want to write a book about them? And I just think, oh, that's where I'm Iranian. Like, we have a different sense of humor about things. We've lived with a different sense of humor. When we're laughing at things, it's not that we're being flippant. It's that we are trying to survive certain things. So there's been eating disorders, for instance, in this book. There's a lot of that. And that's something that's been in my family. It's been in my life. It's been in my friends' lives. And we all have a very dark sense of humor about that, because that helped us survive something that was so taboo and so harrowing. And so I had to write about it realistically. What I do love is that in the Australian New Zealand edition, they actually have a page with like eating disorder hotlines and helplines and things like that. And I love that. I hope for the paperback in the US edition, we could do that too. I would have loved that in this. But the point is, like, this is very real for us. And it's something that Iranians will just discuss very like diet culture is just discussed very differently among Iranians. Not just in my world, but in worlds I've observed. And so it's trying to explain that, and but again, like Kevin Kwan, like, does a great job of like having, the East Asian world that he's describing be just there unapologetically. And he's trusting the right readers to understand what he's doing. So that trusting the reader part was challenging for me. I'm glad this book's come out like when I'm 46. I don't think I could have written this as my first book when I was like in my late 20s. That's hard to do. So people sometimes are like, how did a book that's like a page turner like this, or it's kind of fluffier than your other books, why would that have taken you 13 years? But to get all these things right, and to have like some of the maturity to survive some of the more spicy or risque aspects of it, I think I needed to be like middle-aged, Yeah,
I mean, not to be flip, but like when I was reading the book, I couldn't help but like I think this book sort of, even if you're a guy, like I was like trying to pick out like which sisters I was most like.
Yeah, totally.
I was like, I think who's the orthorexic sister? Is that the word for it?
Haley.
Yes, yeah. I was like, I mean, I don't know if I'm orthorexic, but I'm very health conscious.
Right.
But I was like, I'm sort of vibing with Haley on that level, and then Mina. I think I'm some combination of Haley and Mina.
I love that so much. I talked to someone yesterday who just loves Roxana and was like, actually, and she put it really amazingly. She's like, I'm a Roxana sun with a Haley rising, but a Mina moon. And I was like, I love that. I get it. Okay.
And, just to kind of circle back a little bit to something we were talking about earlier with respect to this theme of identity and the darker undercurrents of the book and reality versus satire, is that one of the great things about this novel is the way that it can sneak up on you. And that Molly Bloom soliloquy that you talk about from Joyce, I mean, these are interesting bits of DNA for a novel like this. And to have a pop kind of novel have like a James Joyce influence and Ulysses, no less. I mean, it's like the full Joyce. But that's where I think this book sneaks up on you, is where suddenly Roxana, who's this brash, unapologetic, sort of like hyper-capitalist teenager, suddenly goes on a confessional and has a panic attack and reveals her humanity in a way that's really actually deep and affecting. And it sort of goes, you go, whoa, like I thought we were at a party here, but it, do you know what I'm saying? Like there is like a mashup. There's like a mashup of those things happening
Right.
that I think is really where the book is most interesting for me,
Oh,
and where these
thank you.
characters become most affecting and most human.
Oh, great. That's a dream for me. That's what I hoped. To give Roxana like that final chapter, but also give her these moments of reflection with her family. I mean, those were very hard to write because Roxana is one of those people, like the minute she gets serious, she has to be like undermines it. We all have friends like that. We're like, oh shit, I'm getting really deep. Just kidding. Like we
Right.
can't handle the vulnerability. She's one of those people. But I really felt like I really wanted to give her a little bit of that. She has a little bit of a rapid coming of age in this pandemic era. They all kind of do in a way, and I even I saw this happen to some of my own friends, who are much older, obviously, and they really changed in that era. And the pandemic just early pandemic gave us so much time for self-reflection, which was giving people in this hyper-capitalist society, giving people time for once, right? Time by themselves, to actually think. A lot comes up, and not all of it is pretty, and a lot of it's really difficult. So I wanted to give her that moment. I mean, I have a sequel in my mind where Roxana, she changes a lot, and but it's not like she changes in the way you think. Like, I don't think Roxana is going to be like the perfect model citizen who's going to do community service work and is going to be someone you and I would hang out with. But I think like I'm interested in how she grows up, and I also feel like Roxana, like her relationship to those early relationships you have, that's also pretty formative for all of us. I think back to like my first boyfriend that I had when I was 17 and how much that affected my life. And Damien is somebody, not to give too much away, but like Damien really like gives her this incredible gift at the end, which is like, I understand. And she's not ready for that. She's like, wait, what?
Right.
You forgive me for all these lies and all? And he's like, I love you. I'm with you. And that for me was very difficult to explain why somebody would have that reaction and what that would be like. These young people undermining themselves and self-sabotage for me is a really fascinating topic. Because
it's unexpectedly moving.
Yeah. Because can't you imagine? I mean, in a way, like it's actually quite hard to imagine. But in our era, right, we're Gen X. Imagine if we had been like on TikTok all the time, and somehow brands gave us deals, and maybe we became some sort of content creator, YouTuber. Like that's really, really hard. You're having to monetize your personality, and people are reacting to it all the time. I was watching like the D'Amelios, Charlie and Dixie and like Addison Rae, and I was watching them super young go through all this and people reacting to every little thing and them having these sponsorships and brand deals and all this stuff. Like, and then having moments where their humanity would break through and people would suddenly be like, whoa, wait. And then other people would be like, wow, this is so vulnerable. This is amazing. So it's a very interesting time that I think is, I do think Gen X and Gen Z do understand each other. They are like our children, right? I don't have kids of my own, but if I did, they'd be this age. And maybe we understand millennials and boomers a little less. But the world they've created, I don't know if I would have survived it, honestly.
Yeah, it's a lot. I mean, I have a 13-year-old daughter who's like right in the sweet spot of all this. And I'm like the grumpy dad who like won't let her have social media. I'm like, no, I don't. I'm scared. I'm like, listen, I don't think this is good for kids. And all these kids are anxious and depressed and, seeing therapists. Not that that's bad, but it's like the numbers are striking. Yeah, their lives are hard. And so I think like, there's plenty of time to try to become an influencer and get a brand deal or whatever, which I find depressing in some ways, but
it is depressing. I mean, I'm hoping your daughter's age, is she Gen Alpha now? That's Gen Alpha, right?
I don't know. She's 13. So I don't even know how it all breaks out.
I think it is, but I think it's going to be different. The pendulum swings. There'll probably be backlash. I already see some of the younger Gen Zers just, they like can't stand TikTok. They can't stand some of this stuff. So I have hope in that way. But yeah, it is. I don't think if I had a child, they would absolutely, there's no chance they'd be on social media. No way.
No, not until they're much older. And
Right.
I'm telling her when she's 18, but we'll see how long I can make it.
Right.
So I want to talk with you about like this word pop. And I want to talk with you about your career. I mean, this is what, your fourth or fifth book?
Fifth book.
Forgive me. Fifth book. Okay.
Yeah.
And you have your editors sort of pushing you to write something that addresses what, Iranian identity and girlhood / womanhood or something like that. And there is something about the influence of Louisa May Alcott in Little Women that struck me when I was reading up. And I think you said Little Women was always a book that I couldn't stand. I realized, though, in my research that Louisa May Alcott also didn't enjoy working on it. So that made me more interested. And I want to talk about this because I think Louisa May Alcott was being pressured to write a bestseller, something like that, right? Write something that's going to have wider appeal. I could see TEHRANGELES having wider appeal, like from the packaging to the contents, like the whole thing feels like it has a chance to be popular. There's a 50,000 copy first print run, which is not the norm. I mean, there's like a higher print run for this book than maybe your previous books, correct?
I think so. I never know the number. I saw that in print somewhere, but I never focus on that, or I never know what normal print runs are. So I was told, people texted me and I was like, I have no idea, but I know that this is my first book that they also put under the category women's fiction as well as literary fiction. So I think there was this interest in like trying to get a wider audience for this book.
Okay. So my question for you, because we all got to live, right? And publishing is notoriously hard. It's a tough nut to crack, right? To make a living. And we are in the same general age range. What I'm wondering is how much of the pop in this work of literary pop satire was really conscious and intentional. Like, okay, motherfuckers, I'm going to try to write a popular novel. Like, was that on your mind as you wrote this, or was it something that sort of was more incidental?
It's such a good question, because I do think about it like a lot with a lot of other writers too. And nobody's ever asked me this. I love this question, actually. So, honestly, if I could just, I feel like, hopefully it's not narcissistic, but if I could walk you through some of my other books, like if I think about the first book, right, because of all the press I got, I assumed that it would have sold a lot more copies. Like I did, the Kurt Anderson show on public radio, it got a full Sunday New York Times book review by Judy Budnitz, for me, rock star in the literary world. I was so excited. It got so much. So I was like, in my head, I was like, this has got to mean a lot of copies sold. And then I realized years later when I actually asked about the numbers, it didn't sell a lot. It's still in print because I think people put it on syllabuses, and they teach it. And there's been some great dissertations and things like that on it. It's really nice. I think the paperback's sold a little bit more. My second novel had pretty pitiful sales, and I had an editor that that was a whole other story. I had some really big problems with the team in the US on that, because there was some sexual harassment components and other things that were happening that were really harrowing. So that book's life got truncated, sadly. And I also thought that was on a lot of lists, on BuzzFeed lists and things like that. Like, that's going to sell, right? Not really. It has a great fan base. People do love it. They bring it up a lot. That's great. But that didn't sell a lot. And then, to my absolute surprise, I shouldn't have been surprised. I should have been more savvy. I mean, I'm not a good salesperson. I'm not a good business person, or I wouldn't constantly be a broke person freaked out about paying rent. But my third book, 6, sold more than all my other books combined. Its sales were really good. And if it had made that in the first week, it would have definitely been a bestseller. But I was also very ill during the promotion of it. And I was being pushed to do tons of events, and I was having literally like breakdowns during the reading where I was end up on a stretcher in a hospital, and by breakdown I don't mean like a mental breakdown, although that probably too, but physical breakdown. I was very ill. I couldn't finish the book tour, so it was very hard for me to promote. And that book did so well, and I was shocked because.
Wait, why do you think it did so well?
I'm actually. I really am shocked because I didn't think of Lyme disease, for instance, as being something that has universal interest. But I guess it was, illness and addiction, and it's a book with my face on the cover. People like faces on covers. I don't know. It had such a big audience. I still get emails almost every week about that book. I do events around that book. I mean, it's just huge. And I felt like the writing was the weakest in that book. I had written the final draft of that while I'd had a concussion. I was literally at NYU Concussion Center with vestibular, physical, and neuropsychiatric therapy 3 times a week. And I was breaking their rules. They said, don't look at screens. And I was just writing all the time, desperately trying to make my editors or HarperCollins happy so I could deliver it on time. And I had lost several editors and several publicists by the time it came out. Like, it was so. I do think that the early pandemic helped because books on chronic illness and disability had more interest, because suddenly all Americans, if they weren't chronically ill themselves, someone in their world was, right? There was more awareness of it. Health problems I had, like POTS/dysautonomia, that sound really obscure, suddenly lots of people knew about because that became a long COVID health issue, So that could be why the sales went up quite a bit. I was doing a lot of events via Zoom for Sick years after it came out. It came out in 2018. So I do wonder about that, but I wasn't prepared for that book to do as well as it did. And then, I had this essay collection. It had the worst pub date you can imagine, May 2020. if we could say this, the start of the pandemic, who really knows? But like March 2020 was like the big month, right? And then May 2020. I mean, we had so many supply chain issues, things like worrying about the printing, all that. I mean, we were really worried that the publishers could even print that book. And I'm at Knopf Doubleday, that was vintage. And normally that's a pretty smooth machine. And so everybody was panicked. And I had this great book tour plan to go all around the country. And then suddenly I'm doing these Zoom events. I didn't even know what Zoom was at that point. So I'd done Skype events before, but not Zoom. So I had no idea. But it was just, that book didn't really sell well either. And I think that had a lot to do with the time it came out. It got all pre-pub star reviews. It's still being taught. I'm still doing events on that. But then this book, so I didn't do it in a calculated way thinking it's going to make money, because it was in a way my second book, right? And it was a response to these editors, but not my editors, by the way, not the editors I ended up with, but these other editors that are floating around still. Some are not even in the industry anymore. But I don't think I don't know if I'm ever going to know what's going to sell well in America. I'm always surprised. I look at the bestseller list. Some of them I understand. Some of it's like, I'm like, okay, whoa, I don't get it. But I certainly don't think there's anything wrong with survival, and selling. I don't even know what, I feel weird about it always, because I have so much ick around capitalism and rich people, and I'm sort of freaked out by all that stuff as a person. But I certainly would love to survive, and I have been bad at it my whole life, and I'm still always, my finances are always in shambles. So the one thing I've thought about this book and some of the sequels, and in my head, I thought it could be really great for film or TV. And luckily,
I was going to ask.
Yeah, last year, a wonderful film TV agent, Sylvie Rabineau at WME, who does a lot of film to TV stuff, approached us, and she's been, representing it. I've been going on lots of great meetings. Nothing's happened exactly yet. There's been some really promising interest and stuff that really encouraged me. I had these the great meetings with these producers who are really well known at pretty big places, and I normally thought, oh, these people are going to hate me. I'm just going to seem tacky, like I'm going to order too much food at lunch because I'm poor, like I'm going to say all the wrong things, like no one's telling me what to say, help, But they were so nice, and they loved the book so much, and their vision for it seemed so healthy, and they were some of the first, like I had my own readers, but they were some of the early readers, people that I don't know that read the book, and their response was so great that I thought, oh, that could be great. So I don't know. I don't know what it would be like to survive in this country well. Like, my parents really struggled with it. There's relatives we have that have been really great with it, but we're estranged from a lot of it. And so I really don't know. It's such a strange world. I've become used to working like 4 or 5 jobs. Like, even on this book tour, I'm doing manuscript consults in my off hours, and I'm always working, doing so much that I don't know what it would feel like to wake up one morning and have like a healthy bank account and live in a house I've bought and have security. I've never had it. And I hope I've recently had some panics about it, because I thought, okay, I'm 46, and what is it going to look like in the last third or fourth of my life? I don't really know. I always thought that these illnesses would get me, and that, I probably, in my 30s, when I started getting really sick, or even late 20s, I started to realize I can't afford the illness that I have, Lyme disease, and its sort of world of all the other illnesses you can get from it were just too hard to treat and too expensive to treat. So, one of my old editors, Cal Morgan, I remember having a really long conversation with him at one point where I was thinking very seriously about these programs of assisted suicide programs. And I was talking to him very calmly and rationally about it, thinking okay, this is something that gives me comfort, because I don't want to keep being a burden on people in my community and on myself. And I don't really, sorry, I'm being really emotional, because I remember this meeting with him really well. And he was the acquiring editor on Sick, and then he had left and ended up at Riverhead, and now he's not there, but he's still a dear friend. He was very encouraging. And he just told me, that's not an option. We're not letting you have that option. You've got to stick with it. And he really believed in this book. And I had a bunch of friends who really believed in my work and still believe in it and believe in my survival. So they give me a lot of courage. But I've had a lot of really bad car accidents. I've had a lot of illness. Even last night, I was telling you, I had this terrible airplane mechanical failure on the way here to my LA book tour, and I thought, okay, well, this is going to be it, So I just, because I don't have my own kids and I'm not married, I don't have the sense of oh, I have to stay alive. For me, I've had a dog, so I think I've got to stay alive for my dogs. That's pretty much it. But I always have godparents for them in my head too. So I don't know. I hope that sounds like such a sad answer, but I haven't worked it out yet, really. I feel like I'm still figuring that part out of what does it mean to survive in America? A big part of me wishes that I could go back to Iran. Persian was my first language, and I'm in touch with a lot of Iranians there. Our government there is an absolute disaster, and there would be no way to go there at this moment. It's very horrific. But when I think about growing old, as a writer, I think I'll put out maybe 10 books. I have probably 10 more. I've finished book 6 and book 7, and I'm thinking about book 8. Maybe I have 10 books in me, and then I'd love to be an old lady who goes to Iran and maybe lives in the village my grandmother lived in and has a garden and maybe just a modest job tutoring or something. I don't know. But I think I would have to transition out of this dream world I'm in. And my dream world, by that I mean, as a child, I always dreamed of being an author, an American author. And I have diary entries and all sorts of things. I turned in elementary school when I was actually practicing writing novels that said, one day I will be an author. I even said my first book will come out before I'm 30. It came out a few months before I turned 30. I had this, I will live in New York City. I will write for the New York Times. All these things that I wanted happened. And so I'm living the dream of this little me. So I feel really satisfied. There's only a few other literary goals I have. I've been in the website New Yorker. I'd love to be the print New Yorker one day. I would love to make people happy with a book that sells well. A national bestseller would be great. I don't think I'd ever get a New York Times bestseller, but I don't know. I'd like to just get more publishing contracts. That's my dream, just enough so my editors will be happy, my agent will be happy, so I could have people just give me this gift for a few more books, and then I could be okay, I can leave now. You
yeah,
don't have
peace
to
out.
yeah.
Gonna go tend to my garden.
Yeah.
So you said you have the next book done, and then you also have alluded to possible sequels to TEHRANGELES.
Yes. So the next book, I have a short story collection of short stories that I've worked on since 2002, and a bunch of them have been published and some haven't. And so there's a short story collection that I think will be my next book. That's still something we have to sell, so we'll see. And then I worked on a dog memoir, which hopefully
Cosmo, R.I.P.
Yeah, the love of my life. Last time we interviewed for your podcast, Cosmo was still alive, and he just died in February at age 11, very suddenly of a stroke. So I'm still grieving him, and then I just got another dog last month. I rescued a dog, worst timing ever, but he's a delightful, completely bananas little puppy, a mini golden doodle, we think. We're not sure. Maybe a mini poodle. So I'm a big dog lady. So I had a lot of dog insights in me. So I finished a draft of that as a residency. And then the sequels. I could even, I know what the next book is, and I know what a third book would be. So it could be a trilogy. But I've asked my agents and editors, I'm like, how much do you have to sell to warrant, like to justify having, sequels? I don't really know what the answer to that would be. Kevin with Crazy Rich Asians, he sold so much. It made complete sense to have more books. But, if that doesn't happen, maybe I could, and if a TV thing does happen one day, I could put those ideas into that form, or even smush them into like a feature film. I don't know. But I'm really attached to the next book if it could happen. I've written 100 pages of it, but I have the whole plot.
Oh, well, good.
And it's a real-time thing again. It's another real-time project, because this time it takes place during Woman Life Freedom and all the way into this current moment. And we're talking about the daughters trying to grapple with being activists. And you can imagine how that would go for some of them.
Yeah.
Not well, but there's a lot in there that I want to explore. And I feel so they've won me over. I started this book thinking, I don't know about these girls. I don't know about this project. And now it has me hooked a little bit. So I want to finish that arc. And I think this book is just the beginning.
All right. Well, congratulations to you. You're very industrious for somebody who's had so many different health struggles.
I think that's the thing about the chronically ill, disabled communities that sometimes people don't realize is, like, when we're doing well, we become very invested in working hard and we love it. And sometimes we do it so much that then we get sick again. It's this huge challenge to figure out the balance when you have these things, like how much do you rest, how much do you not. But every time I'm doing well, I'm just like, okay, let's go, because this was the love of my life. I started writing, like, seriously, like when I was 4. I knew I wanted to be an author, so I had a very strict schedule on the weekends when I didn't have school, or in the summers, of like reading and writing. And yeah, I still it's still my top, like, love. Let's write if we can.
Well, it's been fun talking with you. I'm glad we got a chance to catch up. I wish you well on the books, and I wish you well with your health.
Thank you so much, Brad. You're the best. Thank you.